So,
Sounds
quick
good.
introductions. Welcome. This is the California 4-H webinar, and we have our guest speaker today, Jamie Morris, and she's going to give us great ideas right in time for Volunteer Appreciation Month in April. So, it's all up to you, Jamie.
Alrighty. Well, then I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And Charles, you had suggested that people make the screen as big as possible, correct?
Do your full screen,
Yep.
please.
So hold on one more second. There we go. So that is the entire width of your screen, or should be, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Cool. All right. And I like to start off by, well, obviously, I know y'all can hear me, me using the y'all as well. But I know in Zoom, there's a way to raise hands and that kind of stuff. I don't know if I'll notice that because I'm not used to using Zoom on a regular basis. We have another program that we use out here. So if you have a question, I would just ask you to just unmute and throw the question at me because that might be the easiest way to handle this. So without further ado, welcome to Motivation by Appreciation. So my name is Jamie Morris. I work with the University of Maryland. I'm an extension specialist at our state 4-H office, and I focus on volunteer systems and development. So actually, I've done some presentations with Jolynn Miller from out in your neck of the woods, and I'm happy to serve our state at our state office. I've been with Extension for about 6 years, 4.5 in the county as a 4-H educator, and then the last 2 years at our state office. And prior to coming to Extension, I did have 10 years of teaching experience with private and public schools and 4 years of working with daycares where appreciation is very minimal, to say the least. In other Extension or 4-H terms, I am a blue person by nature, and so I like to demonstrate the way my appreciation for my volunteers or my colleagues by bringing my energy and excitement to the events that I participate in. And this in the county that I used to work in was not always appreciated because it was a rural, tight-knit, very family close-knit community. So I think that's where I started my quest to find ways to motivate by appreciation. And what I'm going to share today is based on research. There's a lot of research out there in terms of how we appreciate and recognize volunteers, 4-H as well as in the mainstream, but also some practices that I have used, as well as from some of the resources that I will provide after the session. So hopefully what I share will be of benefit to you, to your volunteers, and by extension to your youth and families and program. So hopefully today we will meet these 4 objectives, very basic objectives. We're going to discuss volunteer motivation and the reason why people volunteer with our program or in general. We're going to talk about recognition, and we're going to identify some recognition preferences that align with those different motivational needs. And we're also going to talk about appreciation. We'll define that and differentiate it from recognition. And then we're also going to talk about the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace, and hopefully give you some ideas of how to use that with your volunteers and with your program. And hopefully you'll walk away with some simple ways to show appreciation as you move forward with your 4-H programming, as well as with your colleagues, and certainly in honor of Volunteer Appreciation Month, but also throughout the year, because appreciation isn't just about one month or one event. It's about the daily gratitude, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I like to throw this out there. This is something that Jolynn and I put in our presentation we did for NAE4HA, and it definitely connects to our topic for today. So I'm sure most of you have seen the ISOTERM model and realize that it's an acronym, but it's also our model for volunteer administration and development. It's used by most of the volunteer specialists across the states, and it is definitely the one that NAE4HA promotes and supports. So it is a model that was developed in the 1960s in North Carolina by Dr. Robert Nolan, and it was actually adapted for use in the 4-H program in 1971 by Dr. V. Milton Boyce, and has been used ever since. Now there are other models out there that some people like that are maybe a little bit newer, including GEMS, which stands for Generate, Educate, Mobilize, and Sustain, and LOOP, which stands for Locating, Orienting, Operating, and Perpetuating. We're going to talk a little bit about Isoter, and we're going to also relate it to what we'll talk about today and how to use it in order to find out how volunteers want to be appreciated and how they want to be recognized. So as you can see, the I in Isoter stands for identification or identifying, which is the way we find people with the competence and attitude essential to be 4-H leaders and volunteers. We all, I'm sure, are familiar with screening, which is that interviewing and backgrounding of potential volunteers to match them with the roles that we need them to play in our programs. O is for orientation, which is that process of onboarding volunteers to 4-H. It's usually what's going to provide the basics of what's expected of them, youth development expectations, overview of 4-H trainings offered, and policies that they have to follow, as well as a connection to us, to Extension, and to the support and resources that we can provide to them. T is for training, and that's developing their knowledge and skills and attitudes, either through online, face-to-face, or other methods of education. And this can be required, or it definitely should be ongoing and offered regularly, which I'm sure y'all do out in California. U is for utilization, which is providing opportunities for volunteers to put their knowledge and skills into action to support your programs, to help you reach all of the youth that we hope to reach in a year. And R is for recognition. That's the rewarding of volunteers for their contribution and performance. And finally, E is for evaluation, which is assessing volunteer participation and achievement, as well as providing feedback on their role. So today today's topic actually connects very directly with recognition. But as you can see, there's a lot of steps leading up to it, and this entire model is actually all linked. So we'll touch on how these other steps are going to contribute to our appreciation and recognition plans, and how we can best utilize information that we glean from those different steps. So as you see on the screen, we have a variety of volunteers that serve our programs. They are going to help our programs grow, thrive, and survive. Although 4-H volunteers are going to differ from state to state, county to county, program to program, it's usually going to have people that are assisting with clubs or projects, working with youths at camps, through outreach events, in school enrichment programs, or other events, including workshops or at the fair. So volunteers give countless hours of service. We all know that. And one thing that we may not think about is that they actually give this service during their leisure time. It's important for us to remember that they could be doing something else with their time, but they're choosing to spend it with us. They're choosing to help us. They also do jobs so we don't have to, or they bring expertise that we may not possess. So I know I personally do not know how to tag a goat. Now, in the county I worked in, that was a big deal because we were a rural community and had a lot of animal projects. So I didn't have that skill, and I don't know that I could actually do it if I had the skill, because I'm afraid of hurting an animal. So I actually had to rely on my volunteers, because they brought the expertise and they were able to do that. So I actually was able to assist them. So sometimes they're going to be the experts, whereas we are going to be learning from them. And then they also help us meet our program and organizational mission and goals. And their support, dedication, and passion help us reach a larger population than we could on our own. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here. And we all know that they help us make a greater impact on our program and on our community and on our youth than we could by ourselves. So with all that being said, then my question to you, and I think you're here for this, for the same reason that I'm here, is that we want to strive to create a positive environment for our volunteers, and one that our new volunteers are going to feel welcomed, engaged, and motivated to become involved. And our long-term volunteers should feel that they belong and are useful and are impactful, and they should be motivated to remain well after their children age out, because we know a lot of our volunteers come in as parents. So finding ways to appreciate volunteers in a way that they appreciate can create a positive, more pleasant work environment. It can increase retention, or it could even increase long-term volunteers, creating a desire for people to stay on longer than they originally had planned. It may improve productivity and quality of work. It can reduce stress, and it can improve morale. So this isn't just what it's going to do for the volunteer, but it also has an impact on all aspects of your program. Because if you think about it, that volunteer up in the corner giving us the thumbs up, we know this person is the face of our program. This may be the only person a youth knows as a 4-H leader. So they are representing us. And although we are focusing on this volunteer, we want to develop them, we want to appreciate them, we want to keep in mind how that appreciation can affect everything else. So by giving this volunteer appreciation, there's going to be tendrils of positive effects on all aspects of our programs, because this volunteer may work with a group of youth in a school club, and that appreciated and happy volunteer is going to create a sense of belonging and a safe and inclusive environment for those youth. Now, since that volunteer is appreciated and happy, they will probably have a positive effect on the youth. They may encourage them to participate in other 4-H opportunities. They may they're helping to develop that positive relationship with a caring adult, and they may encourage them to stay in 4-H for the long haul. Because as I'm sure is the case in California, we start losing kids when they get into that senior age bracket. So that positive and appreciated volunteer may have that impact to keep them in 4-H until they age out, and could even inspire them to be a volunteer as a youth, but also return as a volunteer when they are an adult. Now, we know these volunteers are also going to have connections with the parents through the youth. And again, if they are appreciated and they are happy with their volunteer role, they will most likely have that positive effect on the parents as well. They may encourage the parents to participate, to assist, to help out at a club meeting, but they may also help recruit and cultivate volunteers for your program, which I'm sure every single one of us is always looking for those good people to come in as volunteers. And then finally, think about how that appreciated and happy volunteer is going to help and benefit you. They definitely have a connection with you through those kids, through the parents, through the program, but also as a direct report to those 4-H educators or 4-H agents. So if you have a happy and appreciated volunteer, imagine how it can make your life just a little bit easier, because you may be more productive because they're doing their job and they're happy in their job. You have less problems you have to deal with potentially, which hopefully could make you a little less stressed. But then also that positive feeling of the amazing programs that you're providing to the youth. So that's got to be an incentive in itself. So appreciation in your program may not be a cure-all, and there's no guarantee that it will be accepted by all volunteers, because everybody's human and everybody has different needs and wants. But the benefits should outweigh any cost or negativity you may encounter. So we're going to dive in and talk about some ways and things to consider when we appreciate our volunteers. We're going to start off with motivation. So that's that inherent drive or desire that's going to drive individuals to action. And it is definitely essential for volunteering, and it's an essential factor in appreciation. So as individuals, motivation to volunteer may come from either an internal or external place, and it may come from a specific force or need. So what you see on your screen is actually David McClelland's trichotomy of motivational needs, which actually is the most widely used motivation taxonomy used in research and practice. And it proposes that individuals are motivated by those three needs: the need for power, the need for affiliation, and the need for achievement. And we'll talk a little bit about these, and we will talk throughout how to connect back with them. So we're going to start with achievement. So that's described as working towards something only to achieve a goal or a dream. So actually completing something, actually providing a program, or finishing a project with a youth. This type of motivation may be characterized by someone who strives for excellence and wants to do their personal best. And as we think about these, I want you to think about maybe people that you have connections with, either colleagues, but specifically some volunteers. Because when you know a volunteer's motivational need, you can certainly connect with it and provide appreciation that feeds that need. We're going to go to the need for affiliation next, and that's described as establishing, maintaining, or restoring a positive, effective relationship with another person. So this type of motivation would be characterized by someone who enjoys being with other people. They like to feel included and accepted, a blue person like myself, and they may have the desire or the need to be liked and may seek approval from others. So I'm sure you can think of some volunteers that may have that same motivation. And the top one, that need for power or influence, is described as the control or influence of the thoughts of another individual or a group of individuals. So this may be characterized by someone who likes to make an impact or having influence on others. And they may have big ideas and they may like to share those ideas. So as you're thinking of volunteers that fit into these motivational need categories, that is the first step to finding a way to appreciate them. But I do want to encourage you to see all of these needs in a positive light, because sometimes people have a tendency to cast a shadow on that need for power, or someone that is motivated by that need for power. So I want you to think of it more as someone that is going to definitely have those strong opinions, definitely want to be involved in decision making, but I'd like you to see it as someone that could lead to be a strong advocate for you, such as on a fair board or on a county board of commissioner, and someone that may fight for you and your program, because someone that is truly motivated to serve the 4-H program and has that need for influence could play that role. A lot of people think it may lead to butting heads, or just someone that is trying to run the program for you. But I'd encourage you to think of it as someone that could definitely be a mover and a shaker that could represent your 4-H program. So knowing a volunteer's motivation is definitely a great asset to you, and as we will see, it's going to be a tool to help appreciate, but also it can be used beyond appreciation. So in terms of how to utilize them in your 4-H program, it could be very helpful there too. Some other factors to consider when you are going to demonstrate appreciation would be time and their goals. So when I talk about time, I'm not talking about time in a year or time in a day. I'm talking more about how much time is that volunteer serving in your program. So we have all different types of roles, not just positions, but how long they're going to serve for your 4-H program. So in Maryland, we have what we call our certified volunteers. Those would be long-term volunteers that are going to assist on a regular basis all year long, and most likely they're going to serve multiple years. So we've had volunteers that have been around for 40 years or more. And those would, I guess you could call those your traditional volunteers. I'm sure it's similar in California, but in here we also have short-term or high-impact volunteers, and those are like our trip chaperones or our camp staff. And they're going to be people that are going to dedicate a short amount of time, a 2-week, 3-week period of time for camp, but that is some intense experience. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy, it definitely drains you, but they are going to not necessarily be a part of your program the entire year, but just for that short period of time that is the camp or the event that they're going to chaperone for. And then finally, you may have episodic volunteers or volunteers that only assist one time at an event or judging at the fair or presenting during a workshop. They're not necessarily a certified volunteer, but it's somebody that's helping out your program, and your program is benefiting from them. So thinking about how they are serving your program and the amount of time can definitely determine the best way to appreciate them. So as we move forward, keeping in mind these factors in mind is going to help us. And then finally, when you think about why a volunteer is a part of your program, there's typically a goal that they have for themselves or perhaps for the program or the club that they're working with. So this is similar to motivation, but it's what they want to get out of volunteering, what they want to achieve. So some goals may range from that need to actually fulfill volunteer hours for school or work. We in Maryland have a requirement for high school students to do 75 hours of volunteer service before they graduate high school. So we have a lot of youth volunteers that are a part of our program to help complete those hours, but it's also a way to teach them about 4-H if they're from outside of 4-H, and hopefully bring them back as long-term volunteers when they're adults. Some volunteers might have a desire to try something new to see if they like it. So if there's someone that may have intentions of becoming a teacher, they may come to you and ask to be a part of the program so they can try it, so they can see if they can hack it. And then also they may come to learn and or practice specific skills. Or a couple other reasons they may come, or the goals they may have include to share their passion or knowledge with others. I'm sure you have volunteers that's why they're there. And then finally, there are some people that volunteer in order to get a job or to get their foot in the door to have a better chance of getting a job. So you may be asking yourself, how am I going to find out or know what a volunteer is coming to me with? What are the factors that are going to affect that volunteer? To which I would reply, much of that information may come from those other steps in the ISOTUR model. So when you're identifying and selecting a volunteer, information that's presented in those conversations is going to help identify the role, that time that they're going to commit to your program. Through the interviews, which are typically done in the selection step, as well as interactions in your orientations, your training, your utilization and evaluations, those interactions and the observations you make when you're working with those volunteers can help identify those motivational needs as well as their goals. So the more time you spend with a volunteer, the more you will learn about them, and then you will be able to identify those factors that can help impact their appreciation or the appreciation you give them and impact their volunteering. But don't take away that I'm saying you have to spend more time with your volunteers, because we all know we don't have a whole lot of time to spare. But I would encourage you to be more aware of your volunteers and have conversations with them as you are interacting with them, as you're working with them at different events. So now that we've talked about our volunteer factors and how they may affect appreciation, let's discuss the difference between recognition and appreciation. So as you may remember, recognition is the R in ISOTUR, and recognition is included in most models of volunteer administration and in most 4-H programs. So recognition is defined as the acknowledgement or the process of recognizing an individual's abilities, knowledge, service, or other specific qualities. community. So recognition usually is something that is seen in formal recognition modes, as you can see in the picture on the screen. And I'm sure this is something that everybody is familiar with. But formal recognition is something that research shows is the most frequently used method of recognition in our 4-H programs. So most of us will recognize volunteers annually at youth and adult recognition or achievement events, or a volunteer social, or tea. These are public displays usually that include refreshments or a banquet, social time, speeches, and extrinsic display of recognition, such as a certificate or a pin, a gift to thank them for their years of service, as well as plaques or awards. Now, all of that is good, mind you, but one of the things that we need to keep in mind about recognition is what it is there for and what it actually is demonstrating. So recognition usually focuses on behavior, performance, or achievement of certain goals. So typically, we'll recognize a volunteer for their years of service or their hours of service to a program. They may get that pin or their certificate for those years or hours of service. It is often provided in the hopes of improving performance. So some may promote that we have different awards, or we have different recognition, and you have to achieve a certain number of hours or certain years in order to attain that reward. And that may work for some, but some people are not motivated by those awards. It can be costly, though, and that's something to consider. We will talk about tangible gifts when we talk about appreciation, which can also be costly. But when we think about recognition, it is typically offered to everyone, so the cost does get a little bit higher because you have to prepare for everyone. And it typically is focused on what is good for the program. It is demonstrating the volunteer's worth to the organization. So we talked about those hours of service, which are actually used to calculate their monetary support, or their monetary commitment to the organization. And I'm sure you guys are all aware of how that's calculated, where you take the hours by the independent sector value to determine their annual benefit to the organization. It's a great way to recognize everybody as a whole, but it is doing just that. It's not recognizing the individual. And then recognition is typically implemented from the top down. So it's usually a group that's putting on recognition night. It may be an individual that is tracking information in order to reward people for those hours of service. So when we talk about recognition, it is not a bad thing. Do not get me wrong. Recognition is already part of your program, most likely, and it should remain. It can be beneficial, but it shouldn't be the only thing that we do, because it does give that broad message of thanks to volunteers collectively. But it doesn't necessarily connect with everyone. So a free meal is definitely nice, and getting to dress up and go out is always a benefit to some people, but it may not be the best way to connect with those short-term and episodic volunteers, the ones that were at camp that may not be around in your program when this recognition event comes around. It may also not be the best way to connect with affiliation, or it would be a good way to connect with affiliation motivated volunteers, because then they would be hanging out with others and interacting with colleagues and friends. But it may miss the mark for those volunteers that are achievement and power motivated. They may not really feel appreciated or feel benefited by a formal recognition event. However, informal recognition, unlike formal recognition, are the small, everyday gestures that one does to express gratitude. So rather than being an event that an organization arranges, it's an action initiated by someone. It could be a supervisor, a colleague, it could be even from a youth or a parent. And these are usually personal, they're spontaneous in nature, they focus on unique characteristics or accomplishments of the individual. And Another way to think of informal recognition is appreciation, because the definition of appreciation is the expression of gratitude for someone's time, energy, effort, or specific participation in a particular program. So where recognition is focused on that whole group, thanking everyone, the appreciation will focus on the value of that individual. So those episodic volunteers or the short-term volunteers that spend a week at camp, they're going to get smiles and high fives and hugs from all the campers and staff throughout the week of camp. You may do some simple recognition at the end of camp, like a camp certificate or a little camp award or some memento to remind them of their experience. But that ongoing appreciation is something that will truly motivate and most likely bring back those volunteers. Appreciation is provided to demonstrate gratitude, and it's likely to improve that connection to the program, which in turn can increase the support and or contributions. So if you think about it, an unexpected thank you for something you did because you enjoy doing it can be more meaningful than that certificate that you're going to hang on the wall, because it's coming directly to you. It's coming from someone that, you know, maybe you work with, or maybe is going to, you know, be a friend. It's talking directly to what you provide to the program. Appreciation doesn't have to cost a whole lot. In fact, it can cost as little as your time, energy, and thoughtfulness. And I know our time is very valuable and very limited, but taking the time to even just put in your calendar a simple reminder to email people after an event, or taking some time while you're eating lunch to write out a thank you note, it can actually be more impactful than spending a whole lot of time planning an event that maybe not everybody's going to feel connected with. So thinking on those same lines, sending an email to tell a volunteer that they did a great job at an event is definitely not going to take a whole lot of time. Or posting on Facebook, you know, a picture of an event with the volunteer and thanking them publicly. That's not going to take a whole lot of time. Appreciation also focuses on what is good for the person, not necessarily focusing on what's good for the organization. And that in turn can be a benefit to the program and your organization. Because if you think about it, a shy volunteer who is getting recognized at your achievement event, who may turn beet red being called up to get a certificate for their hours of service in front of hundreds of people, may not really feel appreciated. But if you invite them to your office to have have coffee with you and have a one-on-one meeting with you, that shy volunteer may feel more valued and feel special, and therefore may be more willing to help out or take on additional roles. Appreciation can also, like I said before, be implemented by anyone, from all the way to the top brass down to the clover bud in the newest clover bud in your program. So volunteers could congratulate each other. A youth can send a thank you note to a club leader. A 4-H educator or agent can send an email to a volunteer. It can happen at any time and from any direction. And that's what makes it personal. It's what makes it really fundamental to keeping our volunteers connected to our organization, and it's individualized and it's genuine. So some other ways that you can incorporate appreciation or that informal recognition, you can think of it as praise, encouragement. It can be seen as that pat on the back, and it could manifest itself in those very simple things, those thank you notes, the phone calls, the personal visits, very simple, easy to do activities. And informal recognition or appreciation can also connect better with all those types of volunteers. Again, those long-term, short-term, and episodic volunteers, as there's no need to wait to deliver that appreciation. It can be real time and connected to their actions. It may resonate more with achievement motivated volunteers as it's directly linked to what they're actually doing, what they are actually helping out with. And for those power motivated volunteers, a thank you note or a phone call or a visit from one of the youth that they influenced or from a club that they helped to support, that shows that they are more connected and they are more valued. And research does show that volunteers do prefer to be recognized, to have those connections with the youth, to get those letters, that it's more impactful than that certificate for their hours of service. So we're going to explore appreciation a little bit more because there is a fabulous book out there that is a great resource, and we're going to draw from the 5 languages of appreciation. So I don't know if anyone here is familiar with this, but this is a great resource. You can purchase it online, and I don't want to hawk it, but as a certified trainer for this program, I find it very beneficial. But even before I was a certified trainer, I found this book very enlightening and encouraging, and I found great ways to connect it to what I was doing in my 4-H programs. So it is, the 5 languages of appreciation is based on the Motivation by Appreciation inventory, and that assesses individuals' preferences for how they are best encouraged and feel appreciated by others that they work with. So in our world, it would be those volunteers that are in our workplace, but a lot of the information is translatable. The inventory and the book are based on the 5 languages of love. So if anybody is familiar with that, what we're going to share in those 5 appreciation languages on the screen will be familiar. And the premise is that we perceive appreciation in our own way, but we tend to give appreciation in the language we receive it. So through the inventory, what you find out is there is a primary language of appreciation for each individual. That means that that is the way that you feel the most appreciated. Not to say that any of the other ones are going to rub you the wrong way, but if you can find someone's primary language of appreciation and connect with that, then you may have a greater impact, and they may feel more valued and connected. So my languages are the quality time and acts of service are my highest languages, and then my least preferred language is tangible gifts. So if somebody came up and gave me a gift, I would accept it. It may not mean as much to me as someone coming to my office and asking me how was my day, spending some time with me, actually getting to know what's going on in my life. That's a little bit more impactful. So just knowing what somebody's language is can be beneficial, and we'll talk more about how you might be able to figure that out. So there are, you can find out more about this at the appreciationwork.com if you're interested in learning a little bit more, but we're going to dive in and talk about some of these languages of appreciation. We're going to start off with the words of affirmation. So just to keep us in mind of what we talked about earlier, recognition, and as per what we talked about, is about performance, and appreciation is about the person. So that'll help as we go through these different languages. Words of affirmation can either be written or spoken. There are several different ways it could be delivered, and someone whose primary language is words of affirmation may prefer one over the other, but they really generally they like that feeling of praise or that feeling, those words of gratitude. So some different ways this could be delivered or it could be used would be personal or one-on-one. So actually talking directly to an individual about their contributions. So for example, after or during an event, saying to a volunteer, I really see how much the youth learn love learning from you, and I appreciate your passion for 4-Hers. That can really hit home to that volunteer whose language is words of affirmation, and it can make them feel connected and valued. Some may appreciate praise in front of others. That can cause a problem with some people. However, it's not necessarily a negative thing, or it doesn't have to be a negative thing. But if you're in a group of people and demonstrating your appreciation for an individual to other people can actually be an effective form of praise as well. So for example, if you're at an event and there are a couple people just milling around and you notice, somebody that you want to appreciate, as the conversation is going, you could even say, something like, "Oh, we're so lucky to have John on our team because he is a huge asset to our program." Obviously, John would be there, but you are talking to the group as a whole. A couple other ways that I'm sure most people are familiar with would be the written affirmation, like the picture on the screen. So writing those thank you notes, the posts on Facebook, even creating a display board in your office that has pictures from an event that may even have written comments from participants at an event. This may take a little preparation time to do, but imagine having sticky notes at an event that people could just write comments on and stick on a poster board as they leave, and using that in some sort of a demonstration of your appreciation. Again, research does say that volunteers do prefer letters and thank you notes from youth as compared to coming from us. So thinking about how you could prepare a program to have thank you notes available for the kids to write as they are finishing up, or maybe even having a requirement that every youth has to write at least one thank you note to the volunteers that helped out. I will share one of the things we did at our camp a couple years ago is I made little sheets of paper that you could cut apart, and it was a simple way for the kids to write something to each volunteer. So they had to write their name, and then they had to write something that the volunteer did over the week, or something that they remembered about the volunteer. And then we had our teens cut them all apart and then portion them out into the appropriate, we gave them little mugs to put their notes in. So then all of our volunteers took home a mug of happy thoughts that they could look at throughout the year. Another way to use words of affirmation might be in a public affirmation. So if you're at an event or you're being asked to give an opening salutations or greetings, you can always throw in a little appreciation of somebody in that salutation. So if you're at a public speaking event and you had a volunteer that helped to organize it, you could recognize them. You could show your appreciation for them during that opening event by saying something like, "I appreciate the extra time that Charles put into this event. It was a huge undertaking, and his dedication to the program is evident." So all of those ways to share your praise can definitely be beneficial to those volunteers that speak that language or that language resonates with them. So I do want you to take a moment right now, and I want you to think about your own experiences to see if maybe words of affirmation might be your language. So thinking about your recent interactions with other people, have you received any verbal affirmation from a manager, a colleague, or even a youth or a parent or a volunteer? And if you did, think about what they said, and then think about how it made you feel. Because if what they said made you feel good, it gave you a little pep in your step, or gave you a positive charge for the rest of the day, this might be your primary language of appreciation. And not that you'd go out and advertise that, but that might be something you may want to share with people. Because if they know how you want to be appreciated, then it's easier for them to give you that appreciation. And as you are working with your volunteers, you can be mindful of watching how volunteers react to your words of affirmation. If you have someone that you praise in front of other people and they turn beet red like that shy volunteer, it may not be their best language of appreciation. So then just keep track of that. Be mindful of that. One of the other ways to show appreciation would be through quality time. And in the book, the authors talk about it being a very powerful tool, yet it's largely misunderstood or underused. So for volunteers or people that quality time is their primary language, a little time can go a long way to help them feel valued and to be connected with the larger purpose of the organization and to solidify commitment to getting the project completed. Again, this is my primary language of appreciation, and I cannot tell you what a difference it makes when my boss stops in my office and asks me how I'm doing, how my dog is, even just chit-chats me up a little bit, because that, to me, that shows that I am a part of it all, that I am valued, and that he wants to connect with me. Doesn't happen all the time, but it definitely does make a difference to somebody if this is their primary language. Some things that or some ways that quality time can work, or that it may be seen in a program, might just be having those conversations with two people like my boss and myself. Sharing experiences or with someone else, like attending an event or doing an activity together. It could be work related. It could be outside of work. Having a small group dialogue about work related or other topics, maybe over lunch, but just having those conversations with each other, as well as working in close proximity with coworkers on a specific task or project. That may not seem like quality time, but while you're working, you're having those silly little conversations to fill the time or to fill the silence. And that's what quality time is all about. So some ways that you can utilize this with your volunteers is to ask them to go to lunch to talk about 4-H if that's their passion. Obviously, that depends on a lot of things like your schedule, but if you have the time and they're there for something else, definitely make that offer. Ask a volunteer out to coffee to talk about things other than 4-H. And again, it can be a little time consuming, but if this is the way a volunteer that really contributes to your program feels appreciated, it may be worth your time doing it. But then even just calling them up and chatting with them about something. And if you really want to get outside of the box and you have some younger volunteers, try to FaceTime with them. I'm sure that would go over gangbusters because it shows that you are, getting hip with the technology, but it's also spending time with them. If you are going to use quality time with your volunteers, there are some things you want to make sure that you do in order to make it genuine and make it really about that volunteer. So making sure that you use eye contact when you're talking or having those conversations, making sure you're not doing anything else while you are listening. So that may mean that you got to mute your phone and put it away. If you're in your office, making sure that either your phone's on the do not respond, or somebody is catching your calls and holding them for later. Even turning your monitor off if you're in your office to make sure that nothing is going to distract you, that it's all about them. It's even better if you go out of the office because it's removing you from those other stimuli, and it's going to make you focus on that person and having that conversation. You also want to make sure that you observe body language, one that's going to help you in all other aspects of your volunteer management duties, but also it's going to tell you maybe if this is necessarily the best appreciation venue for them. And then also you want to resist that impulse to interrupt. You want to listen to them. You want to affirm their feelings. Even if you disagree with their conclusions, you are there just to kind of make that time with them and to listen to them. So again, we're going to think about your experiences to see if maybe this might be your preferred language. So I want you to think about recently or any experiences you've had with volunteers or colleagues. And think about when you're in your office or when you have some free time during an event, Do you talk to them about personal interests? Do you talk to them or just chit-chat them up? Do you wish that they'd ask about you or just come up and talk to you? Because if you do kind of feel that urge or feel that desire to have someone chit-chat you up, then this might be your preferred language of appreciation. And again, not that you're going to go out and advertise it, but sharing that with those close to you, it might make a difference in how you feel connected and you feel valued. Acts of service is our next one. Did we have somebody on the chat? I do not know. So acts of service, this may seem like an odd a way to appreciate others, but those that actually feel appreciated through acts of service really the message that they are getting out of it is that you are showing them that they are valued, that they are appreciated. You're not just saying it. It's not just meaningless words. You are showing them. The one thing to keep in mind as a 4-H staff member or faculty member is that we have to make sure that we're not confusing our acts of service with things that we are supposed to be doing for them as a volunteer. So thinking about going above and beyond those general volunteer manager responsibilities is where you would find those acts of service. So some examples of how this may play out in real life would be if you have an activity that volunteers typically manage. So let's say it is putting together the materials for your volunteer forum. They're going to pack up all the envelopes with the schedules and the printouts and all that good stuff. But that's typically done by your volunteers. Offering to go in and help, to pitch in, may just be the appreciation that they need. But also, when you go to attend those club meetings, as I'm sure many of you go visit the clubs, showing up a little early or staying a little later to see if you can help set up or clean up. Definitely giving them their space to do their thing, but being there to lend a helping hand, that might speak to them in terms of how you appreciate them and how you see them as an asset to our program. Making sure that volunteers have access to resources, that is part of our job, but reaching out to them and asking them what they need or what you can do to provide easier access or help them do their jobs, that might be that act of service that really makes them feel connected. So making sure that you are keeping in mind some tips that will help you is going to be beneficial. So some tips, some practical tips for using acts of service will include making sure that you are not avoiding your own responsibilities. So don't offer service if it's going to impinge on your own responsibilities. It should not make your life harder. It should help to make somebody else's life easier. Definitely ask before you actually help. Specifically ask how that person would like you to do that task. You want to be helpful to them. You do not want to be seen as a hindrance. And that's why if you're going to help them, you got to do it your way. You may think you have a better way, a more efficient way of doing it, but you really need to honor them by doing what they ask you to do and how they ask you to do it. Oh, do we have a question?
Actually, Jamie,
yeah.
You have about 5 minutes to 10, so just kind of giving you a heads up.
That is good. We are getting to the end, so thank you very much. Then also making sure you check your attitude so you are coming to it with the appropriate expectations. So as you are working with your volunteers, making sure that you provide or offer these acts of service is definitely something that you're going to want to consider. since we are running a little short on time, the last two forms of appreciation are pretty normal or understandable to us. Tangible gifts is definitely something that people appreciate, and it can be something, we see this in our normal recognition anyway. But the one thing to keep in mind for tangible gifts is that it's not necessarily something designed that you would give to everyone, which could potentially cause some feelings of unfairness or preferential treatment. So if you are choosing to use tangible gifts with a specific volunteer because that's the language that they appreciate, then I would encourage you to make sure that you are picking things out that are not necessarily a high monetary value, but are of value to that person. So if they like Dunkin' Donuts coffees, getting them a Dunkin' Donut coffee when they come into a meeting with you, doing something that is not going to cause problems with other people. And then the last form of appreciation is that personal or that physical touch. Now, this may be causing some red flags to go off in your head. And this is definitely one of the topics in the book that they don't put in the inventory because they have found that this is not anyone's primary language. But physical touch, when it is actually used appropriately, it can convey a lot of appreciation. And the ways that we would use it in 4-H would be those high fives, the handshakes, the pat on the back, the knuckle bump, like Michelle and Barack are doing in the picture. Those can definitely convey a lot in a very simple and short amount of time, but we want to make sure that we are being mindful and watching for people's reactions and respecting their personal space if we choose to use these. So putting it all into action, one, I would encourage you to follow John Lipp's advice on the screen, and that would be to incorporate it all into appreciating and recognizing your volunteers, because that's really what's going to help volunteers and staff feel respected and valued for what they give to the organization. So I would encourage you to spend some time reviewing what you currently do and considering what you can do to add appreciation into your already awesome programs. You don't need to get rid of anything. The traditional recognition events and methods are great, but how can you expand on it to explore where you might need or where you could add some of those appreciation techniques? And thinking about how you best do it, thinking about the easiest things first. So if you have an and that goes back to those factors. If you have an affiliation motivated volunteer and you want to demonstrate appreciation to them, maybe you could ask them to help you plan your next recognition event. It doesn't take a lot of time or energy, it helps you out, but it may make them feel valued and a part of it all. Maybe for those achievement motivated volunteers, asking them to be a part of a training that is going to teach other people or lead other leaders. That may help them meet that achievement need. They want to finish something. Or even asking a power or influence motivated volunteer to serve on a hiring committee, finding ways to tap into those motivations, as well as being mindful of those time commitments. How long are they a part of your program, and when should you be appreciating and recognizing them, as well as how can you connect with those goals. So if someone's there to fulfill volunteer hours, provide that, but it may lead to something bigger. It may lead to more service and more support. And then also connecting with those languages of appreciation. It can really send the message home if you can speak their language. So I'm sure I'm like right on time or maybe a minute over. I would encourage you to also think of those national events that you can attach appreciation to, like this month, which is National Volunteer Month. There is a National Volunteer Week, which is actually the 15th through the 21st of this month. And then also think of like National 4-H Week. Anything that you can highlight volunteers during is great, but also how can you incorporate it into your daily life, and how can you just throw out a thank you and make somebody feel a lot better about being a volunteer with your program. And I bet, Charles, you're going to tell me we're done. Is that right?
No, I was going to say thank you.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
You made some really good points for me because I think it is true with the group too, which is, a lot of times we go in there and we appreciate our volunteers and our colleagues coming from our lens
Hmm.
and don't even stop to think that what the person really wants. And so
Exactly.
that's a biggie.
Hmm.
That's a biggie too. Thank you.
Well,
And
you're
yes,
welcome.
with that, we are closing up. Do people have one or two quick questions at all for Jamie? Anybody?